I am really curious about this new world that's emerging and how is humanity going to remain relevant? And I really believe we need to.
For more than 12 years, Jem Fuller has run his own executive leadership coaching practice and author of the award-winning book, The Art of Conscious Communication.
I really had some understandings of myself and life and what it was all about, but I lost my way. And in my early 40s, it all came to a crash.
What brought you back?
From the outside, my life was like an Instagram feed, but on the inside, I was really struggling, and my deepest insecurities played out in sexual anxiety. I had belief since I was 6 years old that I wasn't good enough. And that belief played out throughout my life. I lost my job, lost the marriage, lost the house. So then began the work. If you don't do the daily work, you're not going to create a foundation of sustainable neurological change.
There's all these affirmations. I'd love to hear how you were able to incorporate it in your life.
I think it was because I was so...
Jem, welcome to the Relaunch to a Rich Life show. It is so good that we are back in action.
Hilary, we made it. We made it. It's awesome. I've been very excited. I tell you, I looked at my calendar. We've just got back from Cambodia. We had 3 weeks off, which was beautiful. And I got off the plane on the weekend and looked at my calendar for the week. And I was like, yes, Hilary and I get to hang out. That's awesome.
That's so funny because I did the same. I wasn't coming back from Cambodia. I was just literally coming into my office, and I do one of those like, oh, as I'm walking and I'm looking at my calendar and I'm like, oh, yes, so excited. And I think that where I would like to start is you've had a very colorful life. You have literally been through so many relaunches, and I'm wondering where you're actually going to start. But when I ask you the most significant relaunch that really shaped the man you are sitting in front of me today, what would that be?
It's got to be the one when I was 42 years old. It's the one that everyone calls the midlife crisis. But it's funny, I never felt like it was it felt like a crisis, but I never thought of it like a crisis. To me, it was always a midlife awakening. And it was a midlife remembering. You know, we have these chapters in our lives, and through my 20s when I was wandering around India for the best part of a decade barefoot and you know, quote unquote, seeking enlightenment, but really just a young kid trying to figure stuff out. I really had some beautiful understandings back then of myself and life and what it was all about. And I forgot that. You know, I got caught up in the corporate world, and my intentions were good. I was really just wanting to be the best husband and father I could be. So I was working really hard and trying to earn as much money as possible and building a house for these kids and a home and etc. But I lost my way, as many of us do in that corporate capital kind of more climb the ladder situation. And then in my early 40s, I was, it all came to a big crash, and lost my marriage, lost my job, lost our house, lost all the belongings, kept my 2 boys 50-50, week on, week off, as we came out of the divorce. But I had a whole bunch of debt. So I owed a lot of money, and I had my 2 boys and nothing, and started all over again. But it was actually the launch, yeah.
Jem, what happened? What caused the crash? You said that you went from, a young kid figuring out barefoot, 10 years. First off, you don't hear about too many young men going off and trying that line of life. You were doing that. So you were well ahead of like this introspective type of who am I and where do I fit in this world? And you came back, and I want to know, like, you came back from that. What brought you back? And how'd you end up getting into corporate, which seems so exactly the opposite of walking around for 10 years barefoot? Like, you got to fill in some blanks here, buddy.
Okay. All right. We got time?
Not a lot of time. You got to make it fast.
I got to make it fast. Okay. I'll try and give you some snippets that will help fill in some of the gaps. So there I was wandering around the world, mainly barefoot. Sometimes I'd put shoes on begrudgingly, but I was wandering around and just addicted to travel. And I was really addicted to getting into cultures that were very, very different from where I grew up. I wasn't interested in traveling to places similar to where I grew up. So Australia is quite similar to America. I never had a calling to travel around the States. I was called to travel through Pakistan and Tibet and India and Southeast Asia and places like this. And so there I was. I came home on a return ticket, so I wasn't intending on staying. I was just coming home to visit family. I hadn't been home for a few years. Came home, fell in love, went, wow. Got married and said to my then wife, we're not together anymore, but we were together for almost 20 years. And as we got married, and I said, look, I'm still traveling. So if you're wanting to marry me and hang out with me, you're coming traveling. And she was like, okay, let's go. So we got married and took off for another few years. Like a working honeymoon, you know. And then when we got home, we wanted to have kids. It's like, right, we both want to be parents. Let's have kids. And I was now in my early 30s going, what am I going to do to provide for these little people, right? I'd never had a job for more than a year. I didn't have any qualifications. I'd done lots of different things. I was a tattooist and a fire dancer and a kindergarten, all the things you read out. And I didn't know what to do. No qualifications. So I just wanted to get a job in travel. I thought if I get a job with an airline, I can get 10% cheap airfares and I can afford to take my kids around the world because I really wanted to show them there's a big wide world out there. I could not get a job with an airline. I tried to get a job as a baggage handler. They just weren't hiring at the time. And I was like, what am I going to do? So I got a job with an international travel company and I started as a travel agent, sitting at a desk. Back in the days before the internet was really the best travel agent. And I was sitting there booking people's holidays and I was wearing a shirt and a tie. And my friends and family were looking at me. I'm covered in tattoos. I used to have stretched ears and pierced lips, right? And my family's looking at me in a shirt and tie going, who are you? What have you done with Jem? And I'm like, no, I've got to get a job in travel and I've got to feed these kids, right? And I spent 8 years, it seemed like a lot longer at the time, but 8 years with this international company, and I very successfully climbed the ladder. I ended up in senior leadership. I'd bought into my division, so I had skin in the game in my division, and my business turned over $100 million a year, and I had 150 staff, and you know all of the zeros that go on the P&L statement, and all of the pressure in the corporate world to not only make profit but to grow net profit. You know, year on year, quarter on quarter, month on month. If your net profit's not growing, you very quickly get into trouble. And so that pressure is very real, you know, and I experienced that. And I was working really, really hard. I was partying way too hard. I was medicating with alcohol at night. I was getting home, doing the best I could to be a great dad and put the kids in the bath and in their pajamas and into bed. But then I was opening my laptop and still working. So my marriage was deteriorating. All of my deepest anxieties from my childhood got pushed into, under a rug that no one knew about, not even me. But then they started to play out in my relationship. And from the outside, my life was like an Instagram feed. You know, wow, he's earning all this money and he's flying business class. He's got a beautiful wife and two beautiful boys and they've built this beautiful house and it looked like, you know, like all shiny on the outside. But on the inside, I was really, really struggling. And my deepest, most shameful insecurities played out in sexual anxiety, you know, which men don't want to talk about, but I'm happy to talk about because that played out in a very, very painful, hurtful way for me and my wife, and it got worse and worse and worse, and nobody knew about it. And I was
Tell us a little bit more about this because I think this is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And also to if there are any men out there who this resonates with, I've written extensively about this in men's mental health magazines. You can read my publications, you can read my book, and I go into it in more detail. But I had put the trauma from my childhood, I had put it into the very intimate place of sexual anxiety. So all my anxieties were put into this one place that no one knew about. And I'd kept secret. And then through my marriage, it started to play out and get worse and worse and worse. And so obviously my wife knew about it because she was there struggling with my struggles. But it got to the point of being chronic. So I would have anxiety attacks when we would go to make love. You know, and that would play out in either in impotency or premature ejaculation or things like this, right? And it was terrible. And I was so ashamed. And I thought I was the only man who suffered from this. And I didn't tell anybody. And it got worse and worse and worse. So that was in combination with me also self-medicating by drinking too much and working too hard and being successful on the outside at work. But I was moving away from my core values. And I was inauthentic because I was pretending to be, or, 100% everything's great. And it wasn't. And so that really spiraled to a point where I had a spiritual awakening in a sweat lodge, which is a North American Indian spiritual practice here in Australia on Aboriginal sacred land in Australia, in a men's circle. I used to sit in men's circle. And
Did
it
you
all came
know,
to a head.
before you go into that, Jem, first off, I want to say
Mm,
thank you for being so vulnerable, so open.
mm,
Women talk about this all the time. I know I've talked about this whole idea of on the outside, it looked great. And on the
mm,
inside, I was screaming, I'm done. I can't take anything more. It's awful. I was
mm,
single, divorced. I'd just gone through melanoma, all like just ugh, feeling.
mm.
But everyone's like, oh, you've got the perfect, everything is great, even though it was so not. And there must have been a point that you knew to get yourself to this retreat, this sweat lodge. What was that like final straw that broke the camel's back?
It got to the point, and I do need to be conscious in how much I share because I'm sharing somebody else's story who was my then wife.
Mm.
But it got to the point where we had to call it. I had to call it, as in the marriage, and the night that I realized that I couldn't spend the rest of my life in this marriage, that the healing just could not take place in that relationship. The healing that I knew I needed, and it was devastating. No one gets married thinking you're going to break up one day, right?
Right.
You fall in
Isn't
love and you
that the
want to
truth?
spend your life with this person. So that was really hard, and we were so scared to tell our little children that mummy and daddy were breaking up. We were so scared to tell them that we lived for a year, almost a year and a half, under the same roof, having already said to each other that we're separating, but we just couldn't tell the kids, especially my then wife couldn't tell her boys. And it got to the point where I had to tell them because the kids knew. They were looking at me going, Dad, what's up with you and Mum and what's going on? And I was having to lie to my children. And that was the straw that finally broke the camel's back. I'm like, I cannot do this, And I said
Right.
to my then wife, or recently separated, but still living under the same roof, I said, I cannot lie to our children anymore. They're asking me point blank what's
How
going
old were
on, and I
they?
have to tell them.
Yeah. How old
They
were they at that
were they were 6 and 4.
point? Mm. Yeah. So they're picking up all the signs.
Oh, and it was the hardest conversation we've ever had to have. We sat them down on the bed together,
Yeah.
and it was horrible, and it was traumatic, and that trauma played out for years. So there's no avoiding it. There's no way of sugarcoating it, especially the younger one. It really, really messed with him and really hurt him. And my boys are 21 and 19 now, and
Mm.
we talk a lot about everything. And they've also
It
been
does. It
able
does
to see.
but that moment where you tell your
Mm,
children,
mm,
I'll never forget it either. Mine
yeah,
were 4 and the twins were 7. And it
yeah,
is imprinted in my mind. I mean, like I could go right back there right this second and know exactly how I'm feeling. Each one
yeah.
of them, the 3 of them handled it very differently. It was
Mm,
it's just a place you never want to be in. You don't ever want to hurt
no,
your kids, but yet we realize that sometimes we have to move on in our own lives so that we can be a better mom, a better dad,
yeah,
a better spouse, or in a relationship with somebody else. So you decide to
100%.
go to the sweat lodge, you decide to like really kind of take a whole new direction. Tell us about that.
Well, I was lucky that I'd been sitting in a men's circle for quite some years already, with men who I trusted, but I still would sit in that circle and felt like I was a bit of a fraud because we sit round a fire, no alcohol, no pot, no nothing, just sit with water, drinking water around a fire and sharing openly and honestly about where we were at. And these men were sharing to the depth of their vulnerability, and I wasn't. because I was still too ashamed. And then one night after Circle, we were walking to our cars to drive home. And I said to a close friend of mine, hey, can I share something with you? And he said, sure. And I shared just a little snippet about my sexual anxiety. And he said, oh, me too. And I went, what? And he goes, oh, I've experienced that. And I was like, and that was just the crack that opened the door to me sharing, because, and I write about this in my book. Yes, our healing is our own responsibility, but we need to heal in community. We're a social creature. We come from community. You know, we
I
used to
love
have the
you're saying
shaman
this
in the
because I
village.
believe, I love you're saying this because women do this.
Yeah,
And
right.
men need to know that
Yeah,
you opened up at, just the crack of the door and then it just
yeah.
went shoo,
That's
wide
right, you know,
open.
and then very quickly it started happening. So then we decided to have a sweat lodge, and we had the sweat lodge, and I had a profound experience.
Mm,
And then I realized from that experience, do you know what came to me that night? And it
mm.
came to me in a very prophetic dream when I got home from the sweat lodge. But what I woke up from the dream understanding was that I had had a belief in the background that I wasn't even aware of since I was 6 years old, that I wasn't good enough,
Hmm.
that I wasn't enough. And that belief played out throughout my life, you know, in many, many ways. And I, at the time, thought, wow, is this just me? And since then, obviously, on my coaching journey and studying human behavior and the whole thing, understanding that this is so common. This belief that I'm not enough is so common and plays out in different ways, like the imposter syndrome and the self-sabotage and all sorts of stuff. But I realized it, and then,
What's fascinating.
yeah.
Hold on. What's fascinating about this is I refer to your limiting beliefs, those ones that you just mentioned when you were young, right?
Mm,
It usually stems from when you were young. You have a thought and an emotion repeated over time, creates your belief system, good and bad.
mm,
And I call them bugs, beliefs underground surfacing.
yeah.
And we do push them down, we put them behind doors. But remember what happens at the bottom of a door? There's that little crack. What happens in the keyhole? There's that little crack. And they
Yeah.
somehow worm their way out and they
Yeah.
will always roar their, ugly heads
Yep.
right when you don't want them to, right? When maybe
Yeah.
even things are going well and they're like, remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing I constantly talk about are the three queen bees, the three queen bugs. And it is, I'm not good enough, I'm not loved, and I'm not safe.
Yeah.
99.9% of our beliefs, limiting beliefs, all fall into one of those three categories under one of
Yeah.
the queen bees. And
Yeah.
you just said it, I'm not good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything you just said, I've experienced, and so many of us humans have experienced, because it's human, part of the human behavioral matrix, right? This is part of us.
Right.
And for me, I had to come to it, as with most of my realizations about the bigger stuff, I had to come to it on my own. And this is just who I am. I've always needed to come to things on my own, not from a book, not from a guru, not from a teacher. And so I came to it on my own. And then the books all started showing up in my hands, going, oh, wow, here's this Joe Dispenza book on Evolve the Brain. And here's this book around. And then and all the books came, and I realized that I had to do the work. And all of this happened at the same time that I lost my job, lost the marriage, lost the house, lost the whole thing, right? Except for my two boys. So then began the work, you know. And the good news is that we can rewire, thanks neuroplasticity. That's wonderful. The bad news for people listening is that it's not like Neo in the Matrix, where you just take the red or the blue pill and everything's different. You got to roll your sleeves up and do the work. You
You
know,
do.
I've been to Tony Robbins's weekends, love them, they're great. I walked on the hot coals, but if you don't go home and do the daily work, you're not going to create a foundation of sustainable neurological change. So I rolled my sleeves up and I did the work, and I rewired. And you know, the one belief that I worked on first for a whole year, every day, I am enough. I'm enough. I'm good enough
Wow.
just the way I am. And I said it out loud over and over and over again. I used to drive in my car and make up songs and sing it out loud. And then I read that when our dopamine levels are elevated, the neuroplasticity wires together, quote unquote wires, but associates together thousands of times faster. So then I started doing my affirmations when dopamine levels were up, like after my cold shower or after I've just caught a great wave in the surf and I'm paddling back out to the lineup
After
and
a
I'm like,
good
woo!
run, after you dance, you're like, I
Yeah,
am good
yeah,
enough.
yeah.
I am good enough.
That's right. Exactly. So I was like a crazy person and I was singing it and saying it every day so much. And it gradually it started to wire. And then,
Mm,
as you know, Hilary, it was like magic. Hilary, I know you already know this. And so for anyone out there listening, was my lived experience. It wasn't just reading it in a book or seeing a movie and going, oh, that would be nice. No, this is actually what happened as I was doing that work to rewire my beliefs, and as those beliefs started to become reflex beliefs, just thoughts, the outside world started to change. Now, obviously, it was my perception of the outside world, but the outside world started to change as I began to brainwash myself into believing that I was good enough and I did deserve happiness and love and abundance and all of this stuff. Guess what started to happen? And it's really interesting because my beautiful soulmate, my other half, my twin flame, my gorgeous woman who I've been with for almost 10 years now, the order in which we came into each other's lives, she didn't
mm,
show up first. And then I started to go, oh, maybe I am good enough because this woman loves me. No, it happened the other way around. I believed I was good enough first, and then she showed up, right? And I think that order is really
mm.
important. And, to round out the story of the kids and the trauma that kids go through when we were
Yeah.
talking about getting divorced, when our kids were the same age as yours and mine.
Yeah.
And now that they've seen their dad in a beautiful, loving, very conscious relationship where we are just so nice to each other, that they're modeling that now. Their relationships, their young relationships with their girlfriends are like that because they're seeing what it can be like. And I think so the trauma of when they were young was worth it because now if I had stayed together with their mum, they would have been watching two people in a toxic relationship being not very nice to each other. But they've
Jem,
seen now for a long period of
this,
time. So
yeah, this is so important for those people out there that are kind of on the fence. They're doing it. They think they're doing their kids, a service of like, oh, I'm staying with this man, with this woman. And I have to tell you, I too, I'm celebrating my 10-year anniversary here in about a month. And my kids, because I've now been with Eric for almost over 12 years, they are seeing what this love affair that we have and this beautiful relationship, and they are emulating it. And had, my first husband and I stayed together, and, everything was meant to be. But I do have to go back and ask you a question. There
mm,
are many people out there that feel like fakes when they're sitting there and they're saying, I am good enough. I can do anything. Revenue flows to me freely. I mean, there's all these like juicy ones that are out there, these affirmations.
yeah.
I know the science behind it, and I know why I
Mm.
believe and why I do it and why I'm such a fan of it. But I'd love to hear how you were able to incorporate it in your life, even when you didn't believe it.
I think it was because I was so desperate.
Mm.
When I say I got to rock bottom, I got to rock bottom, and I even started to consider the way out. you know.
Uh,
That's how rock bottom I got. And I was desperate, but there was just this glimmer of a light of hope in me, the completely impossible to kill optimist was still just a little tiny light inside of me that
mm,
said, no, I'm not giving up. There's got to be a way. But I got so desperate and I looked at those two boys, my two children, who are still the two most important people to me in the world. And I looked at them, and that was my leverage on myself to do the work. So as I was doing this affirmation, I've got the voice in the background going, this is bullshit. This is not real. This is a waste of your time. That voice was still going. And I said, look, voice, whatever, but I've got nothing to lose. And I've got to do it for these two kids. I have to do it. So I just forced myself to keep doing it. Another important thing I think with affirmations is pick something that you can logically work out that is possible, that could be possible. Give yourself something that's a bit possible. Don't start with an affirmation of next week, $100 million comes to me, if that's just not likely, pick something like I am enough, just the way I am. I am actually good enough to be me, not to be anyone else. I shouldn't be more like anyone else because I'm not. I should just be me. And
You know what I
and
love?
I
I love
do
about what you
deserve
just
love,
said.
you know.
I love what you said, and I have to just make one more point on this. I
Mm,
am good enough can be I am good enough to have this amazing dinner tonight. Like you start with
yeah,
something, I am good enough
yeah,
to put together my calendar for tomorrow. I am good enough. And
yeah,
you start to put
yeah,
these things down, and it's like a snowball. It just
yeah.
keeps rolling, it keeps getting bigger. And then you're like, well, you know what? I am good enough to go to the gym for 30 minutes today. And it's like,
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes, 100%. You know, some people talk about take massive action, but
Mm.
not everyone can take massive action. You know, maybe take a small piece of action, maybe take a small step and say, I'm good enough to take this step. I'm good enough to go to the gym today, or I'm good enough to prepare a meal for my kids today, or whatever it is. So when you combine the affirmation, the positive affirmation, that is those steps and creating the momentum, and you pair that with gratitude,
Mm.
that's a beautiful combination, and you can find things to be grateful for. My family in the Himalaya in India, which is a whole other part of my life, but they've got next to nothing. And the reason they're so grateful, the reason that they're so happy is because they're grateful for what they do have each day, whether it's like, I'm grateful that I've got a roof over my head, or I'm grateful that I've got my family, or I'm grateful that I've got this bowl of rice in front of me. And gratitude brings happiness, as we know. So pairing that together with your affirmations, I think is a good combo.
So relaunch in the future and relaunch what you're working on right now is something so significant, and talk about vibrationally leveling up. Share with us what's on the horizon.
Oh, it's so exciting. We're just about to go out and raise to build the Center of Love, which is our nonprofit that we founded in the States. And the Center of Love is a nonprofit. We're going to be building a meditation retreat center in the Himalayan mountains in our village in India on some land that we've been given. And then this meditation center is going to be a place that we run our high ticket retreats through that we've been running for 15 years. And we're going to run our retreats through there, and all of the money funds education for kids. But more than that, the vision just keeps getting bigger. I've created the Center of Love Alliance, which is 12 founding directors of global love-fueled movements. So we've got a person in there who's put 7 million kids through school in India. We've got a person in there who's building love farms around the world from Brazil. We've got a person in there who's got 3.5 million mums around the world in her community, and she fuels them with love. And so I've brought together these global founders, and we're creating an alliance where we rise the tide together and lift all the boats, and hopefully help tip the scales of humanity in the right direction. So we're going to build these centers around the world where we provide education for not only kids, but for educators, community leaders, hopefully policymakers, to help them start to infuse love into the systems. How do we infuse?
All you need
Yeah,
is
this
love,
is love.
right?
But we need
Yeah.
to find a way to infuse it. And I just one last thing on this, Hilary, because I'm
Yeah.
super passionate about it. I am, as a lot of people are, really curious about this new world that's emerging and all of the emerging AIs, right? And how is this going to play out? And
Mm.
how is humanity going to remain relevant? And how are we going to flourish? And I really believe we need to focus on, yes, we need to work with the emerging AIs. I'm working with mine too. But we also need to be honing our human to human relational depth of rapport capabilities, love, compassion, care, kindness, empathy, all of these things. We need to be nourishing and nurturing these human pieces to remain not only remain relevant but to be more valuable in the future as humans, as humanity. And I'm passionate about this, and I think the AI generation, the young kids who are coming up now, we need to be inserting into the curriculum these conversations, and preparing them for this stuff.
You know what you're really sparking in me is continuing to create empathy and the understanding that we are all one, we're in this together, and the love factor, right? How we bring, and not just like the love of, a mom and her children, a dad and his children, the love of animals, but like humanity, the love
Yeah.
of like, where
Yeah.
are we going? How are we
Yeah.
going to equally survive and thrive?
Yeah.
Jem, how can people find out more about what you're doing and get involved?
A meaning on the mountain, meaning as in the meaning of life, not meeting, meaningonthemountain.com.au, jemfuller.com, and then Jem Fuller everywhere, JemFuller on Insta and LinkedIn, and it's Jem Fuller.
Not
And
just Jem Fuller everywhere. That's not it, everyone. It's
no,
Jem
Jem Fuller.
Fuller.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And by the way, if you feel compelled to connect, to reach out, I am massive on this and I'm available. I'm here, right? I'm a real person. Reach out and go, Jem, can we have a chat? And I will chat with you. I will make a time and let's chat because we need this. The world needs this. You know, we've been driven into division and we've been driven into polarity and we've been driven into blue and red and, you know, pro-life and pro-choice and pro-vax and anti-vax. And this stuff is trying to happen. But underneath all of that stuff, we're all human and we all actually do come from a place of love. And I think we need to be reconnecting as humanity, like you said. So yeah, please reach out.
Thank you for reminding us of the foundation of what will truly elevate, right? Energetically, the vibration of love. I mean, the more you can spread with these wonderful facilities and retreat facilities you're creating. Oh, I'm excited. I'm hoping they'll be ready for me to come visit in 2026 or 2027. You just got to keep me
Yeah.
posted.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for being here. And for those listening, thank you for sharing this moment with us and feeling some of that love that we're sending out to you. I always like to say, live now, love now, relaunch now. Think about that love factor and how you're putting it out into the world. And if there is somebody that you know who is struggling, Jem is a wonderful person to connect with. And that's how we started our friendship, was a connection call. So he offered, take him up. And I look forward to next time that we're all together on Relaunch to a Rich Life. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Jem. Bye-bye.